Mr. King from Iowa, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Carnahan. I appreciate this hearing today, and I appreciate the testimony of the other members so far. And I completely agree with what I've heard the gentleman from North Dakota testify just ahead of us, and along with the rest of the testimony that I've heard. I certainly support Congressman Graves' bill that sets some priorities. And I've introduced a piece of legislation, H.R. 2942, that does not change the order of those priorities, but does require the Corps of Engineers to recalculate the storage space to protect us from serious downstream flooding. And I just touched some of the bases along the way on the scope of this damage. Your opening statement covered most of it, Mr. Chairman, and it's this, that the greatest amount of runoff we'd ever experienced, nearly 61 million acre feet. The discharge at Gavins Point Dam is a key component of this. That's the last valve going into the Missouri River out of the 6 dams. The highest discharge we'd ever experienced in the past was 70,000 cubic feet per second. We found by midsummer, or I'll say by June, about June 14th or 15th, it was kicked up to 160,000, more than twice as much discharge as we had ever seen. That brought about water in the Missouri River bottom that by the time you get to Sioux City, they saw flooding at Sioux City. Just downstream from Sioux City, the river was typically about 1.5 miles wide, and that's narrow. A few miles south of there at Blencoe, 8 miles wide. By the time you got to I-680 north of Omaha, where I cut across the river to go to the airport from the Iowa side, the water was 11 miles wide. And it came back together through the levees and through Omaha and Council Bluffs, where we had 30,000 people in Council Bluffs living below the water line in the river for 3.5 or 4 months while the water table was at the level it was, and only the levee protected them from becoming another New Orleans. And it had some leaks and some seepages. But downstream from there, and Glenwood and south, then the river became 4, 5, and 6 miles wide, on down into Missouri, on through Sam Graves' district. That water wasn't just standing there as people envision a normal flood. This water was running 10 to 11 miles an hour in the channel, and where it was spread out 11 miles wide, it was still 4 to 5 miles an hour out against the base of the hills. And so what you saw was hundreds of thousands of acres covered by sand that now today, when the water's gone down, it looks like a rack. And the loss in crop damage, that just a back-of-the-envelope calculation that we lost in Iowa and Missouri, not counting Nebraska and Kansas and the Dakotas, but just Iowa and Missouri, the equivalent feed value lost is more than half of the wheat crop in Montana, for example. I use Montana because we'd like to have them join all the other states affected in wanting to control this discharge to prevent serious downstream flooding. The Corps of Engineers, in response to much of our pressure that's come, has said initially, well, this is, we're not going to change the management of the river. We think this is a 500-year event. I want to emphasize that we have 150 years of records, and they're declaring a 500-year event. If you had 10,000 years of records, and it happened a couple of times a millennia, you might be able to say this is a 500-year event. No mortal can tell you it's a 500-year event. Lord knows why I've had to live through so many 500-year weather events in my short time here on this earth. And so that's, I think, an arrogant position on the part of the Corps. And to declare that they're going to manage this river, the first slide that they put up is congressionally authorized. And then they decide that they're going to manage the river without the direction of Congress. I think we have to tell them, even though they've changed their position now to a third position. First one was, we're not going to change the management because it's a 500-year event. Second one is, well, we might because we've heard enough from you that we want to at least pacify those objectors that are there. Third one is, now we think we will lower the levels a little more next year, but they don't want to do something permanent. We have to tell them. If we don't tell them, they'll slide back to being run by the environmental interests as opposed to the first priority, which I've heard stated multiple times here, protect us from the flooding from serious downstream. And additionally to that is, and my bill, H.R. 2942, has the support of most of the members. It's bipartisan. Most of the members affected by this, and I think the others may want to take a good look at it again. But it is a very simple bill that does two things. It tells the Corps of Engineers that you shall recalculate your storage space to protect us from the greatest runoff ever. That's now 2011 instead of 1881. I would pose that if we'd had the runoff in if we'd had the runoff in 1881 that we had in 2011, they would have built the PICS loan program to protect us, and we wouldn't have had this event here in this year, because it had been, the storage would have protected us from it. So that's the first thing it tells it to do, and then it says you shall reach those targets by March 1st, which is something that's part of their language. So then one more closing point here, and I know that my time has run out. We also have levees that they are not reconstructing back to pre-flood elevations. And that means that in my district, and Sam Graves' district in particular, they're repairing some of these blown-out levees with sand to the 25-year event, which means that for the last 5 years it would flood anyway. Our people in the river bottom then have to pay triple crop insurance. They can't rebuild. They can't plan anything. And the budgets that they could do intradepartmental transfers on, looking at 2002 by Corps' numbers, 13% of their budget was flood control, 13% was environmental. 2012, they have 0% flood control, 52% for environmental. I suggest that no environmental money gets spent until the levees are repaired to pre-flood elevations. I'd conclude that testimony. Thank you for your attention, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.